Hello everybody. This video is hard for me to make, hard for me to articulate because it involves some of the most horrible crimes I've read about. It concerns Ted Heath, and it exposes a secret investigation by the police in the UK that has not been disclosed to the UK press, nor has it been disclosed to the alternative media, but it was disclosed to me because it involves some of the people against whom I've made serious allegations. The same names keep cropping up. Now, you're probably aware that Parliament have been trying to hush up the rape allegations against Ted Heath, and you're probably aware that the Wiltshire police have got annoyed and they've released materials that show a number of allegations from the 1960s that Ted Heath, former Prime Minister of England, was a child rapist. And you've probably heard the allegations that he's raped boys on his boat and dumped the bodies over the sea, into the sea. But the truth goes much deeper than that, and when you understand the truth, you understand why it's being covered up to this day, and why the Labour Party, nor any other party, has really capitalised upon this to do damage to the Conservative Party. Now, the documents disclosed to me, I can't tell you who sent them, but they look authentic. There's no identifying names on them, identifying police officers. But this information covers something called RAINS. This is the RAINS list. I've got the document open in front of me, but it really is too sensitive for me to paste on the internet. But I have given copies to key journalists in the alternative media with the instructions that if I'm killed or incapacitated or unlawfully detained, that this material goes public. Anyway, this material is called the RAINS list, which stands for the Ritual Abuse Information Network and Support, founded in 1989. It makes allegations against senior police officers, various individuals, including Ted Heath. Now, Ted Heath is accused of wearing some kind of artificial claw as he abuses children in this document. And you might think, why does a man wear artificial claws when he has sex with children? Well, obviously when he's having sex with children, he's having sexual fantasies. And the fantasies of someone that needs to wear some kind of claw is that he's playing the part of some kind of beast, such as a werewolf or a demon. So in Ted, according to this document, he was wearing these claws, so we can deduce that his fantasies in his mind are as a demon or some kind of satanic high priest. And he's become part of this cult, some kind of high priest of this cult that is into this systematic abuse of kids. And people are often incredulous at these allegations of satanic abuse. They think it's Dennis Wheatley nonsense. But you really don't have to believe in black magic to believe in these cults. these cults are just sex games in which the people in the cults, the abusers, are, as I say, are playing these roles, sexually dominant roles, where in their fantasy they are playing someone unquestionable, all-powerful. In other words, a devil or a priest. Anyone who challenges the high priest, gets killed in the fantasy. And Ted Heath turned his fantasy of being a high priest into reality. He became the Prime Minister. And there's a few dozen people on this cult list. I'm not going to read these out. Some of these people are informants. Okay, some in this document it's not exactly it's not listed what their role is, so they could be quite innocent on this list. So it'd be unfair of me to name what each of their roles is. And I see a conservative, the father of a Conservative MP on this list, and the son is a potential candidate for a future Prime Minister. So you can see how sensitive that is. You can see why they would want to cover up Ted Heath's cult. It's not come out that he was a member of a cult, it's just people say, okay, he raped kids, or maybe he was on his boat with Jimmy Savile and he raped kids, but this document is basically incriminating him as part of a cult. This is new. There's a Daily Mail columnist here. It doesn't say what role he had. An electrician. There's a lord. There's more than one lord. There's I'll give you a clue here. There's an editor and journalist, and he's an editor of journalist of a famous online newspaper, one of the biggest, and he's currently in prison for child abuse. So you can put two and two together, and you can figure this list was compiled before he was arrested, so that gives credibility to this list. There's also someone, I'm not going to tell you exactly who he is, but he's a film director, and his nickname is Dickie. So you figure out what his surname is and you'll know who he is. Okay. And I've always felt something about Dickie. I've seen a few of his films and there's something disturbed me about him, his character, and well, now I can see what it was. But I've moved off Dickie. There's a guy here who likes to be known as the Marquis, with a computer code name Desard. Well, so you've got a bloke called the Marquis Desard, basically, as part of this cult. Well, would you want to be part of any kind of organisation where someone calls himself the Marquis Desard, or someone else calls herself the female enforcer? I'm just going through these names, and there's another famous Conservative. She was the Secretary of State for Health. I'll give you another clue, in the 1990s, so you can look that up. And she denied that there was such stuff as ritual abuse. There's another man who I never liked. I never suspected him, but his name appears in Jeffrey Epstein's book. I'll give you a clue. He was famous for interviewing Richard Nixon. Yeah, you probably guessed who it is. UK TV journalist who interviewed Richard Nixon. There's not any evidence about him, but it wouldn't surprise me. There's another director. He was a bit disturbing. Shall I give you a clue about him? He directed some Charles Bronson films, and he's dead now. Oh, and then there's this guy whose famous name, he's a lord, and he was an attorney general under Tony Blair's government, and Tony Blair's in Jeffrey Epstein's Black Book, so why doesn't that surprise me? Oh, and there's a TV personality and presenter. I won't tell you who he is, but someone was found floating in his pool. Nobody names on this list. Oh, here's another MP. This is a former Labour Education Secretary. Name's been mentioned by another Reigns member who has no connections. She told me that her client was abused frequently by him. So this is a Labour MP involved with the same paedophile cult as a Conservative MP. So you can see why the Labour Party don't capitalise upon Ted Heath's rape of kids as a PM, because the Labour Party some Labour Party MPs were involved with the same bloody cult. There's another lord here, and a pop singer. There's not any evidence on the pop singer. It doesn't exactly say what the accusation is, although he was mentioned by someone called BS, so I'll leave that out. There's a very famous Conservative MP who is still active. He appears on the BBC a lot, but he's only referred to in this document as a politician, so it'd be unfair of me to give you any clues about him. I mean, this guy could just be an informant, so, you know, just don't assume. I can't assume that he's guilty without anything else written, or just suspect that he's even guilty. Oh, Christ. There's a cardinal here, a head of Roman Catholic Church. He was very apparently he was very dismissive about these abuse groups. I better not mention that one. I bet you'd like to read this document, but it'd be irresponsible just to release it as it is. Anyway, someone featured on Crime Watch here. Cyril Smith, well, I can certainly mention him. I'll read this out. Since died, I think, mentioned by more than one survivor. Okay, so basically he seems to be involved with a cult to satanically rape Down syndrome kids. Cyril Smith, involved with the same cult as Ted Heath and all the rest of those names I've just mentioned. Once claimed she had been raped by him, but because he weighed so much was allowed to sit astride him. There's a name of a child psychiatrist here. This is a woman's name, Elizabeth. So women, you know, do this kind of thing. Some women are into this because they vicariously feel a kind of masochistic pleasure from seeing a dominant man rape a girl. But then we've all heard of switches, so they get the masochistic pleasure, but they can also get the sadistic pleasure, and then you get some who are just sadists. Probably like Hillary Clinton, although I've got no evidence Hillary Clinton was in any way involved with this cult. But you get the point. There's another MP. 2006 he's mentioned. He gets boys. I'm not going to look up which party he was in, because there's not much evidence. There's an editor of the Private Eye. Okay. Oh, I won't say more than that. But the Private Eye and its editors, they've always disturbed me. There's always something wrong about this, you know, just the pricking of the thumbs, as they say. And there's, yeah, this name deserves a mention. Give you a clue. He's a commissioner of the EU. Yeah, and he acts as if he's a pansy, but from this, that pansy's, that's not really what he's into. So you can think of that pansiness as a cover, and what is alleged here should basically see him hang or spend the rest of his life in solitary confinement. Christ almighty. Tortured, killed, body dumped in sea, south coast, after being cut up. This is disgusting stuff. You know, I believe I've received this document in good faith. I just hope that there's nothing on this which is some kind of trap to lead me to make a false allegation. But I don't see that really. I mean, all they'd get would be to humiliate me, and I've got enough information that no one is going to take me to court for libel. If you see my other videos, I expose the UK courts for covering up Deutsche Bank's money laundering and its gold rigging, and it's all been proven true, really. Oh, Christ. There's another lord here. The second lord, another lord, so two lords. There's a princess, but it just gives the date. It doesn't say what she was up to, so she could be innocent. See, there's a name here which is of a victim, so it would be irresponsible just to read all these names off. There's a former Lord Chancellor, and no, it wasn't Elizabeth Truss before then, but not that long ago. 2006-ish. But doesn't say what he was up to, so maybe he was an informant, you know. So you could always ask him if you can figure out who it is, whether he knew anything about this Reigns list. I'm not saying he's a bad man, he might be a very good man, but he should know about the Reigns list if he's on the Reigns list, eh? A Lord Chancellor who knows something about the Reigns list but keeps stum. That's not good, is it? Another vicar. And you know, there are you know, in the alt media, there are a few people who've got a copy of this, so they might read it out as I'm reading it. So I'm not just making this stuff up. They could call me out any time. They know who they are. Anyway, I'm going to go down this list a bit. There's another MP there. Attended a crucifixion ceremony. That's another MP. And there's an appeal court judge on the fringe. And he's been accused of flashing as well. Well, it doesn't say what he's done. He could be an informant. But he's on the Reigns list and he's an appeal court judge, so that could make him vulnerable to blackmail. So he should have either come out and said what his role was on that list, good or for bad, and then he could have continued with his duties, not kept it secret. I can't believe anyone's on this list without knowing that they're on the list. Oh, there's another bloody MP, isn't it? Jesus Christ. All of these MPs. Anyway, there's a name on this list that was the reason that this list was sent to me. And I'll name him explicitly because I really do not like this man, and I know a lot of people have suffered at his hands. His name is Paul Kernaghan. Okay, the date on this list associated with him is I think that's the 12th of July 2007, 12/07/07, and he's listed as the Chief Constable of Hampshire, and it says in records that he has attended satanic meetings at Masonic Hall twice this year. That's the only thing that's said about him. Interesting that that's 2007. That this is way before he was promoted. He was promoted out of the police and into the judiciary at basically the highest level. There were 3 positions in the judiciary at the highest level in the UK: the Lord Chief Justice, the Lord Chancellor. The Chancellor is an MP selected from Parliament. The Chancellor is basically to look after the finances of the judiciary. And then you have Paul Kernaghan, I think his title is something like the Ombudsman of JCO, and JCO is the Judicial Appointments and Conduct Ombudsman, so it's like a department with a head, and he's the head, so he's the Ombudsman of the Ombudsman, if that makes sense. And it's his role basically to root out corruption amongst the judges, and if he finds a corrupt judge, then he basically fines against them and they get kicked out of office. So he's the man who judges the judges. He doesn't do any court work himself. I mean, he's not a judge. He's just the judge of the judges. So his authority is basically in parallel with the Lord Chief Justice. Now, if you've read my articles, you know I've made very serious allegations against the Lord Chief Justice. I took Deutsche Bank to court for gold rigging, which is a fraud that has trillions of liabilities. It's one of the most serious frauds probably of all time, and it's resulted in the bullion of the West being given away to quite nasty parties around the world, including ISIS. There's serious money laundering. Deutsche Bank were accused by me of destroying bullion trading receipts. Well, that allegation was tested in court this year, 2017. On the 28th of September, I made those same allegations to the lawyers for Deutsche Bank. I made them in front of the judge. I accused them of destroying receipts. There was absolutely no denial. The accusation was made in writing about a week before the hearing. I said to the judge in the writing, if they don't turn up with a receipt, you can assume that they've destroyed them, as I've been alleging. They didn't turn up. Well, if they'd had them, they'd have humiliated me with them, and they didn't. So I think they are guilty as alleged. I think the lawyers know that they're guilty as alleged, because the lawyers would have had to talk to Deutsche Bank directly. The lawyers are Linklaters, and the lawyers would basically go to the client, Deutsche Bank, and say, can we see the receipts so that we can humiliate the litigant against you? And the Deutsche Bank's board will say, no, you can't have any receipts. And the lawyers will say, why? And the Deutsche Bank will say, we can't tell you why. and the lawyers would basically be in a position to know that those receipts don't exist, that Deutsche Bank have committed serious money laundering frauds, serious accounting frauds, and since those receipts were destroyed, it means any audit dependent upon those receipts has to be faked, has to be a fraud, has to cover up the destruction of receipts, and had accused Deutsche Bank of corrupting its audits. Deutsche Bank's been basically forced to confess in New York under Valerie E. Caproni. They've been forced to release 75 tapes showing collusion between the banks to systematically rig the prices of bullion using the same techniques they used to rig LIBOR rates and FX rates, and they've been fined for those. Now anyway, this stuff eventually reached up to the Lord Chief Justice because the lower courts had covered it up, had alleged serious misconduct, and the Lord Chief Justice, once he'd seen that once he saw my allegations, within 24 hours, my appeals were suddenly closed by Lord Ian Burnett, who's the next Lord Chief Justice. My emails were public. I sent them to a number of parties, so these were open letters to the Lord Chief Justice Baron Thomas. And anyone who's got a copy of those letters can see that Paul Kernaghan, this man listed in the Reigns list, Paul Kernaghan was CC'd those letters because he was the head of JCO. He was the man responsible for removing judges from power who were demonstrably corrupt. And I'd shown that Lord Ian Burnett, the next Lord Chief Justice, days away from taking his new role, had dismissed 20 allegations of misconduct against High Court judges without having a transcript of hearing. And Paul Kernaghan would have been witness to the fact that the Lord Chief Justice Baron Thomas violated the Data Protection Act to cover up the fact that there was no transcript of hearing, thus covering up the fact that Lord Burnett was in no position to dismiss allegations of misconduct. And subsequently Deutsche Bank confessed to everything. They pay large fines for money laundering to Russia, from Russia to London. And it turns out, I didn't know at the time, but it turns out there's a $65 billion money laundering ring. Deutsche Bank's role was about $10 billion in that, but most of the culprits were actually the other defendants in my lawsuit. So these judges weren't just covering up money laundering from Deutsche Bank, but money laundering from the entire cartel. And Kernaghan knows that. Kernaghan says he can't believe Deutsche Bank would launder money. And even after the news comes out, he doesn't revise any of his judgments. And Kernaghan would know that the Lord Chief Justice violated the Data Protection Act by refusing to admit that there was no transcript. Because that transcript's got data personal to me, I've got a right to it. I've at least got a right to know whether it exists or not under the Data Protection Act. So why does Kernaghan allow the Lord Chief Justice to get away with it? The Lord Chief Justice, he would be informed that Kernaghan is under active investigation for child abuse. Now, as far as I know, Kernaghan is actually being investigated for 3 different things. First of all, he's on this list. He's also been investigated for covering up child abuse wherever basically he was stationed. and he covered up child abuse in I think it was the Isle of Wight and also Wiltshire, wherever he was the chief. That's where you got the abuse, and he covered it up. According to this, not only was he covering up this Rains document, but he was involved with that bloody stuff. He was doing it, you know. And this Rains list is the abuse of children with Down syndrome. So you've got to figure that Lord Chief Justice would be informed by his own police that Jayco's head was being actively investigated for child abuse by different police forces, different people alleging the same basic kind of crime. So the Lord Chief Justice, well, he didn't say anything, did he? He didn't ask Kernaghan to suspend himself while the investigation was underway, or basically tell Kernaghan he was the wrong man, and if he didn't want humiliation, then he should retire or resign. But Kernaghan was allowed to be in this position, and these investigations have been going on from 2007. And you've got to figure the Lord Chief Justice knew from the very beginning that he shouldn't have been made head of Jayco. I think that was 2016, the very start, January 2016. So why would the Lord Chief Justice suffer someone like him? And it's quite obvious, because the Lord Chief Justice can blackmail him. He can blackmail him with exposing him if Kernaghan turns around and threatens to prosecute someone who's on the Lord Chief Justice's side. So when the Lord Chief Justice violates the Data Protection Act, Lord Chief Justice Baron Thomas, then he's in a position to blackmail the Chief Constable, well, the former Chief Constable, Paul Kernaghan. And so he gets away with a Data Protection Act violation. And a Lord Chief Justice who violates the Data Protection Act to cover up the misconduct of his successor, which in turn covers up Deutsche Bank's frauds and money laundering, well, obviously he was never fit to be Lord Chief Justice. He should be in bloody prison. And Lord Burnet, now this is interesting. Lord Burnet and Charles Haddon Cave, they are both involved in my lawsuit, basically covering up Deutsche Bank's frauds and money laundering. But after that, I think it was early 2017 this year, Burnet and Charles Haddon Cave, I guess they were selected together by the Lord Chief Justice Thomas. They were selected in a judicial review of a hearing requested by the Campaign Against the Arms Trade, which objected to British arms suppliers, manufacturers, supplying arms to the Saudis, because Saudis are known ISIS supporters, along with Qatar, two of the worst nations in the Middle East, basically funding and equipping ISIS to destabilize Syria. And there's another event that's occurred quite recently. The Neon Nettle magazine, or electronic website, released a document that they've subsequently deleted. And the document was purportedly written by Robert Downey Jr., the actor who played Iron Man. Robert Downey Jr. recently denied writing it, but what's interesting is not whether or not Robert Downey Jr. wrote it, but what's interesting is that it alleges that the ex-wife of the previous director of Barclays, Tony Jenkins, was involved in some kind of Hollywood paedophile parties, and that they'd invited the Qataris. Now, the former CEO Jenkins of Barclays is currently being prosecuted for supplying, for lending money to Qatar so that Qatar could buy back Barclays shares. So basically this was fake share price rigging. But they were giving money, of all people, to Qatar in order to buy Barclays shares. Well, that suggests to me that the Qataris were possibly blackmailing Jenkins and Barclays into making them this loan. And so if they're involved with the same paedophile parties, and they say abusing, let's say, 7-year-old girls, well, in many parts of the Middle East, having sex with a 7-year-old girl is not necessarily a crime in the Middle East, but it's certainly a crime in the West. So if the Qataris and Jenkins were basically raping young kids, then the Qataris would have nothing to fear for the release of this disclosure of the information, but Jenkins certainly would have a lot to fear, because his ex-wife and himself were involved with those parties and with organising hospitality for the Qataris while they were executives of Barclays. Now, Jenkins quits Barclays. Who takes over? Jess Staley. If you've read one of my articles, which was published by Catherine Frisk a couple of days before she went missing, and then she ended up being reported dead about 20 days after that. Anyway, the article I published exposed that Jess Staley had been lobbied into his role by, of all people, Jeffrey Epstein, who was threatening Britain should we not put his man in charge of Barclays. So you've got this paedophile running Paedophile Island, Lolita Express. So one of the most notorious paedophiles in the USA. And if you actually read what the original charges against Jeffrey Epstein were, they were far more serious than what he admitted to in his plea bargain. He was basically charged with running a paedophile prostitute ring, an underage prostitute ring. So this was for paedophiles on his island. So he wasn't just guilty of soliciting a child. The allegations were that he was running this child rape ring on his island. So go back to the source material and you can find out how shocking it is what he was doing. He got off very lightly. I mean, he was prosecuted, but he should spend the rest of his life in jail. Anyway, he lobbied to have Jess Staley put in power in Barclays. This was reported by the Daily Mail. Mark Garnier MP and I think David Mann MP are named explicitly in that Daily Mail article, and they said, together with some unnamed MPs, that they would basically quiz Staley on what Epstein's role was in winning him this position. So they told the Daily Mail that. And Staley was of interest to me because Staley had basically threatened me